They called her Barren. They said her womb was empty, and so was her worth. For 7 years, Elena Brooks smiled through humiliation. At family gatherings, whispers followed her. Her mother-in-law would sigh loudly whenever babies cried nearby. Her husband, Marcus, no longer held her hand in public as if her emptiness was a stain on his pride. Yet every night she knelt beside her bed and whispered the same words through trembling lips. "Lord, if you still see me, please remember me." But heaven was quiet. What no one knew was that God's silence isn't absence, it's preparation. Because when heaven decides to answer, no voice of shame can silence the miracle it brings. And just when Elena thought her story was over, her pain became the stage for her divine remembrance. The same people who mocked her would soon kneel in awe. The same man who turned his back would beg for mercy before the one she never stopped trusting. This story is not just about barrenness, it's about faith that refuses to die, even when the world buries it under shame. As you listen to her journey, I pray for you. May every delay in your life become a double testimony. May every silent cry invite divine attention. May God remember your pain and turn it into praise. If this story already touches something deep inside you, don't just scroll away. Tap that like, subscribe, and comment, "My miracle is coming," not just as a reaction, but as a declaration of faith. Because here on Mr. Reality Stories, we don't just tell stories. We heal hearts, awaken hope, and remind the world that grace always writes the final chapter. Now the story in full. The rain came down like accusations. Elena Brooks stood at the kitchen window of their modest Cape Cod home, watching water streak the glass in patterns that reminded her of tears. Behind her, the dining table was set for 2 white linen napkins folded into swans, candles waiting to be lit, a roast chicken cooling in the oven. Their 7th wedding anniversary. 7 years of love. 7 years of trying. 7 years of empty cradles and fuller silences. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the November chills seep through. Outside, the neighborhood was alive with the sounds of children, the Miller boys racing bikes through puddles, the Chen twins squealing as they jumped in rain boots, Mrs. Patterson pushing a stroller past their fence, the baby bundled in yellow raincoat and innocent joy. Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her flat stomach, a gesture so familiar it had become muscle memory. A prayer without words. A hope that refused to die, even as it grew thinner, more fragile, like paper held too long in trembling hands. "Elena?" Nathan's voice carried from the foyer, followed by the sound of his briefcase hitting the hardwood floor, his keys jangling into the ceramic bowl she'd made in a pottery class 3 years ago. Back when she still did things like pottery classes. Back when she still believed in filling her life with hobbies and friends and futures that didn't revolve around ovulation calendars and pregnancy tests. "In here," she called, forcing brightness into her voice the way she'd learned to force it into everything. Smile at the baby showers. Laugh at the family reunions when Nathan's cousins showed off their growing broods. Nod enthusiastically when friends complained about sleepless nights and dirty diapers, as if hearing about motherhood struggles was anywhere close to the same universe as living without them. Nathan appeared in the kitchen doorway, and for a moment, just a breath, Elena saw the man she'd married 8 years ago. Tall and lean with dark hair just beginning to silver at the temples, green eyes that used to look at her like she was the only architecture worth designing, worth building a life around. He'd been an ambitious junior architect then, sketching their future on napkins in coffee shops, promising her a house with a nursery painted in soft yellows and greens. Gender neutral because they'd be surprised, he said, by all of it, the joy, the chaos, the beautiful disruption of plans. But time had rewritten their blueprint. "Happy anniversary," he said, and his smile was tired around the edges. He crossed to her, pressed a kiss to her forehead, safe, brotherly, the kind of kiss that didn't promise anything more. His suit was damp from the rain, and he smelled of coffee and concrete dust and the cologne she'd given him last Christmas. "Happy anniversary," Elena echoed, and turned to check the chicken, grateful for something to do with her hands, her face, the expression she could feel cracking like old paint. Nathan loosened his tie, that expensive silk one his mother had given him, navy with subtle gold threading. Margaret Brooks had excellent taste in everything except daughters-in-law. "Smells amazing," he said. "You didn't have to go to so much trouble." But she had, because 7 years deserved recognition, because she was still trying, still fighting, still hoping that if she could just be perfect enough, the perfect wife, the perfect dinner, the perfect smile, maybe the universe would reward her with the one thing that mattered. "It's our anniversary," Elena said simply, pulling the chicken from the oven. "Of course I went to trouble." Nathan poured himself a bourbon from the cabinet, didn't offer her wine. They both knew she wouldn't drink it, hadn't touched alcohol in 7 years, just in case. Just in case this month would be different. Just in case her body would finally cooperate, finally do the one thing it was supposedly designed to do. They sat at the table, and Nathan raised his glass. "To us," he said, and there was something hollow in it, something that echoed in the space between them like a voice in an empty cathedral. "To us," Elena repeated, lifting her water glass, and they drank to a marriage that felt increasingly like a museum, exhibit beautiful from a distance, untouchable, preserved in amber, slowly dying under glass. The chicken was perfect, the conversation was pleasant. They talked about Nathan's latest project, a community center downtown, his first major commission. They talked about Elena's part-time work at the church office, filing bulletins and answering phones, and avoiding the nursery wing, where volunteers cooed over infants during Sunday services. What they didn't talk about was the elephant in the room, the ghost at the table, the absence so loud it drowned out everything else. They didn't talk about the negative pregnancy test Elena had taken that morning, another in a collection that could wallpaper a room. They didn't talk about the appointment with Dr. Reed next week, the fertility specialist Nathan's insurance was finally willing to cover. They didn't talk about Margaret's phone call yesterday, her voice sharp as glass. 7 years, Elena, 7 years and still nothing. Maybe you should pray harder. Or maybe Nathan should pray for a different answer. They didn't talk about how Nathan had started working later, coming home after dinner more nights than not. How his hand no longer found hers in sleep. How their bedroom had become a battlefield of scheduled intimacy and clinical precision, romance murdered by basal thermometers and ovulation kits. They ate in practice civility, two people who had forgotten how to be lovers, who were slowly forgetting how to be friends. "I got you something," Nathan said finally, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box, navy blue, and slid it across the table. Elena's heart stumbled. A jewelry box. Always a jewelry box on anniversaries now, ever since the 3rd year, when he'd stopped asking what she wanted because they both knew what she wanted and he couldn't give it to her. She opened it slowly. Inside, a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant, a tree, its branches reaching upward, roots reaching down. Beautiful, thoughtful, absolutely not what she needed. "It's the tree of life," Nathan explained, his voice careful. "I saw it and thought it meant hope, growth, roots and branches, us." Elena lifted the necklace, watched it catch the candlelight. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and meant it, even as something inside her crumbled a little more. "Thank you." Nathan stood, came around the table, and fastened it around her neck. His fingers lingered on her shoulders, and for a moment she thought he might say something true, something real, something that acknowledged the chasm opening between them. Instead, he kissed the top of her head. "I need to make a call about the project. Won't be long." He left her sitting at the anniversary table, touching the tree pendant, feeling roots that went nowhere, branches that bore no fruit. The rain continued its accusation against the windows. Elena cleared the dishes in silence, wrapped the leftover chicken in foil, blew out the candles before they could burn down to nothing. She was good at stopping things before they burned down to nothing. She'd had 7 years of practice. Upstairs, she could hear Nathan on the phone in his study, not talking about the project she knew, but probably talking to his mother or his brother James, or anyone who lived in the world of productivity and results and futures that actually manifested. Elena walked to the living room, to the corner where a rocking chair sat, a purchase from their 2nd year of marriage. She'd refinished it herself, painted it soft cream with roses on the backrest. A chair for nursing, for lullabies, for the weight of a child in arms that remained persistently, devastatingly empty. She sat in it now, rocking slowly, the motion, a meditation, a prayer, a rebellion against the emptiness. Outside, the rain fell harder, and somewhere in the neighborhood, a baby cried a sound that should have been ordinary, should have been background noise, but that pierced Elena like prophecy, like judgment, like the one question she could never answer. Why not me? Why not me, God? What did I do wrong? What am I still doing wrong? The tree pendant felt heavy against her chest, its silver branches cold, as her reflection in the dark window, a woman of 32 who felt ancient, whose waiting had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with years. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of prayers, 7 years of pregnancy tests that came back negative, of doctors who smiled sympathetically and suggested, just relaxing, of family members who asked when, as if she had any control over it, as if her body wasn't a country in rebellion against her. Elena rocked in the nursing chair that had never known a child, and let herself cry the way she only cried in private, in corners, in moments when Nathan wasn't watching, when no one was asking her to be strong. The rain fell like heaven weeping, and Elena wept with it, not knowing that this night, this 7th anniversary marked by absence and unspoken grief, was actually a threshold, that the darkest part of her night was just beginning. That shame could go deeper than she'd ever imagined, but also not knowing that Mercy was writing a story in ink she couldn't yet read, in a language that sounded like silence, but would soon thunder with the voice of the God who counts tears, who bottles them, who is never late, even when he seems entirely absent. The tree pendant caught the dim light as she rocked, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled soft, preliminary, the sky clearing its throat before speaking. The fertility clinic occupied the 3rd floor of a modern medical building that smelled of antiseptic hope and industrial-grade carpet cleaner. Elena sat in the waiting room, her hands folded in her lap, trying not to stare at the other couples scattered across the tastefully neutral furniture. There was a young couple in the corner, barely out of their 20s, holding hands with the fierce grip of people clinging to a life raft. An older woman sat alone, her wedding ring prominent, her expression carefully blank as she scrolled through her phone. A couple in their 40s sat separated by an empty chair, not speaking, not touching, their body language a geography of distance. This was the club nobody wanted to join, the fellowship of empty arms, the congregation of biological betrayal. Nathan sat beside her, his knee bouncing a nervous habit he'd developed over the past year. He'd taken the morning off work, which meant something. Lately, everything meant something, or nothing, depending on how you interpreted the semaphore of a marriage conducted increasingly in silences. Brooks, a nurse, appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, smile professionally warm. "Dr. Reed is ready for you." They followed her down a hallway lined with inspirational posters, babies in soft focus, quotes about hope and miracles and never giving up. Elena had learned to hate inspirational posters. They were the participation trophies of suffering, handed out to make people feel like their pain had purpose. Dr. Alan Reed's office was exactly what you'd expect from a fertility specialist at the top of his field. Diplomas arranged with military precision, family photos strategically placed to prove his methods worked. A desk so organized it looked like a surgical theater. The man himself was in his late 50s, silver-haired and kind-eyed, the sort of doctor who'd perfected the art of delivering bad news with compassion. Elena had already decided she would hate whatever he had to say. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks," Dr. Reed greeted them, shaking hands with the firm grip of someone accustomed to being trusted with people's last hopes. "Please, sit down." They sat. Nathan reached for Elena's hand, and she let him take it, grateful and resentful in equal measure. When had her husband's touch become something to endure rather than crave? Dr. Reed settled behind his desk, opened a manila folder that Elena knew contained the results of countless tests, blood work, ultrasounds, hormone panels, the invasive cartography of her failing body. "I've reviewed all your test results," he began, his voice measured, "and I want to start by saying that infertility is incredibly complex. It's rarely one single factor, and it's never, and I want to emphasize this, never a reflection of personal worth or fault." Elena felt Nathan's hand tighten on hers. They'd heard versions of this speech before, from other doctors, other specialists, the preamble before the verdict. "That said," Dr. Reed continued, "I do have concerns about what I'm seeing. Mrs. Brooks, your hormone levels show diminished ovarian reserve. Your AMH anti-Mullerian hormone is significantly lower than we'd expect for someone your age. Your FSH levels are elevated, which suggests your ovaries are working harder to produce viable eggs." The words landed like medical terminology, always landed clinical, distant, describing a body Elena inhabited but apparently didn't control. "What does that mean?" Nathan asked, his voice steady, his architect's mind already trying to blueprint solutions. Dr. Reed folded his hands, and Elena recognized the posture of a man about to deliver the demolition notice. "It means that Mrs. Brooks has what we call premature ovarian aging. Her ovarian reserve, the quantity and quality of eggs remaining, is more consistent with a woman in her early 40s than her early 30s. Silence filled the room like water rising. "Additionally, Dr. Reed continued, his eyes on Elena now, gentle but unflinching, "the ultrasound shows some scarring in your fallopian tubes, likely from an undiagnosed infection at some point. Combined with the hormone issues, we're looking at a situation where natural conception is extremely unlikely." Extremely unlikely. The words sat between them like a death certificate. "But not impossible," Nathan said. And Elena heard the hope in his voice, the refusal to accept, the bargaining stage of grief. "Mr. Brooks," Dr. Reed said carefully, "in medicine, we rarely say impossible, but I want to be honest with you both. The chances of natural conception in this case are less than 5%, and given Mrs. Brooks's diminishing reserve, that number decreases with every passing month. 5%. Elena turned the number over in her mind, trying to find a way to make it sound like enough. 95% chance of failure, a test she was doomed to keep failing. "What about treatment?" Nathan pressed. "IVF? Hormone therapy? There have to be options." Dr. Reed nodded, opened a different folder. "We can certainly try IVF, though I want to manage your expectations. With Mrs. Brooks's hormone levels and egg quality, we'd likely need multiple cycles. The success rate for someone in her position is around 20 to 25% per cycle. It's also expensive, roughly $15,000 to $20,000 per attempt, and most insurance doesn't cover it. $15,000 to $20,000 per attempt for a 25% chance." Elena did the math automatically. They'd need at least 3, maybe 4 cycles to have a reasonable shot. $60,000, maybe more. Their savings would be gone. They'd need to take out loans. And for what? A 1 in 4 chance per cycle of something her body should do for free? "There's also the option of donor eggs, Doctor," Reed said, his voice gentle, as if he wasn't suggesting that Elena's biology be replaced, that her genetics be judged insufficient and substituted. "With a donor egg, your success rate would jump to about 60% per cycle." "No," the word came out of Elena before she could stop it, sharp and final. "No donor eggs." Both men looked at her, Nathan with surprise, Dr. Reed with understanding. "I appreciate that this is difficult," Dr. Reed said. "Why don't I give you both some time to discuss?" "What about me?" Nathan interrupted, and Elena heard something new in his voice. Defensiveness. You've been talking about Elena's problems. What about my results? Dr. Reed turned to Nathan, and something in his expression shifted, a subtle relaxation, the look of someone delivering good news after a run of bad. Mr. Brooks, your results are excellent. Sperm count, motility, morphology, all well above average. From a male fertility standpoint, you're in the top percentile for your age. The silence that followed was different from before. This silence had teeth. Nathan's sperm was fine, excellent even, top percentile. The problem was Elena, only Elena, entirely Elena. So it's me, Elena heard herself say, her voice coming from somewhere far away. I'm the reason we can't have children. Mrs. Brooks, Dr. Reed said quickly, infertility is a medical condition, not a moral failing. But Elena had stopped listening. The room was tilting, or maybe she was tilting, or maybe the world had always been at this angle, and she was only just now noticing. 7 years of wondering, of praying, of hoping it was something fixable, something temporary, something that wasn't her fault. And now, here it was, confirmation, diagnosis, verdict. Her body was broken, her eggs were dying, her tubes were scarred, and Nathan was fine. Nathan was excellent. Nathan was top percentile. Nathan could walk out of this marriage and into another woman's life and have a house full of children within 2 years. The thought arrived with stunning clarity, sharp as broken glass. She was holding him hostage to her broken body. I need to step out, Elena said, standing abruptly. Excuse me, I need bathroom. She didn't wait for responses, just walked out of Dr. Reed's office on legs that felt borrowed, followed the hallway to the women's restroom, locked herself in a stall, and finally let the truth of it break over her. She was the problem, the only problem, the entire problem. Elena pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sound of her crying. But some griefs are too large for small bathrooms and locked stalls. Some griefs need to howl. Some truths need to be screamed. But she'd been trained too well by church, by culture, by Margaret's cutting comments to suffer prettily, quietly, without disturbing anyone. So she cried into her palm, shoulders shaking, makeup running, the tree of life necklace Nathan had given her hanging heavy as a noose around her neck. Less than 5% chance of natural conception. Premature ovarian aging. It's me. It's all me. I'm the broken one. Outside the stall, she heard the bathroom door open, footsteps, the sound of water running. Someone else's grief, perhaps, or someone else's hope. Elena held her breath, waiting for privacy to return. Elena? Not privacy. Nathan's voice, tentative. Wrong men weren't supposed to be in the women's restroom, but apparently this was where their marriage lived now, in spaces where rules didn't apply, where normal was just a memory. I'm fine, she managed, which was such an obvious lie it didn't bear acknowledging. Dr. Reed wants to discuss treatment plans, Nathan said through the door, when you're ready. Treatment plans, as if this was something that could be treated, fixed, solved. As if she wasn't fundamentally, biologically failing at the one thing that defined womanhood in every church directory, every family reunion, every conversation with her mother-in-law. I'll be right there, Elena said, and heard Nathan's footsteps retreat. She gave herself 60 seconds more, 60 seconds to fall apart, to let the truth shred her, to acknowledge that she'd been living in hope that had just been revealed as delusion. Then she stood, washed her face, fixed her makeup as best she could, looked at her reflection in the institutional mirror. 32 years old and already obsolete. A woman whose eggs were dying, whose tubes were scarred, whose worth had just been medically quantified at less than 5%. The tree pendant caught the fluorescent light, and Elena almost laughed. Roots and branches, hope and growth. What a cruel anniversary gift for a woman whose biological tree was barren, whose roots went nowhere, whose branches would never bear the fruit everyone expected. She touched the silver tree and made a decision. She would do the treatments, however many cycles it took. She would take out the loans, drain their savings, put Nathan through whatever she had to put him through. Because if she didn't, if she just accepted this diagnosis and gave up, then what? Then the past 7 years became just waste. Then Margaret would be right about her. Then she would be the woman who couldn't, who didn't, who failed. Elena straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, put on the armor she'd been constructing for 7 years. The smile, the strength, the pretense that she was fine, absolutely fine, just needed a minute. She walked back to Dr. Reed's office. Nathan was sitting exactly where she'd left him, and the look on his face when she entered, relief, mixed with pity, mixed with something else she couldn't name, told her everything about where they stood. "I'm sorry," she said, sitting down. "Please, continue. What are our treatment options?" And Dr. Reed continued, and Nathan asked questions, and Elena nodded at appropriate moments, and they scheduled appointments and discussed medications and signed consent forms. But inside, in the place where hope used to live, Elena felt something new taking root. Not hope, not exactly, but determination. Grim, grinding determination. She would have a baby. Somehow, some way. She would fix this. She would fix herself. Because the alternative, accepting that her body was a broken promise, that God had made her defective, that she was the reason Nathan's family tree would end, was unthinkable. They left the clinic an hour later with a folder full of information, a prescription for hormones, and an appointment for their first IVF consultation in 3 weeks. In the car, Nathan reached for her hand. "We'll figure this out," he said. "We're in this together." Elena squeezed his hand, grateful for the lie, knowing that they weren't together, not really. He was excellent, top percentile, perfectly capable. She was the problem he was trying to figure out, the defect he was trying to engineer around. "Together," she echoed, because marriage had taught her that some lies were necessary, some performances were required. The drive home was quiet, both of them lost in private calculations, Nathan probably running numbers, costs, timelines. Elena running different numbers. 95% failure rate, $60,000 or more, her mother-in-law's voice saying what she'd been saying for years. Maybe Nathan made the wrong choice. Maybe you're not the right fit. Maybe God is telling you something. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained grey, heavy with the weight of clouds that might break any moment or might hold their grief forever, impossible to say which. Elena touched the tree pendant and tried to pray, but the only words that came were, "Please, just please." It wasn't much of a prayer, but it was all she had left. Margaret Brooks's house was the physical manifestation of her personality, imposing, immaculate, and just slightly too warm. The heat turned up to a temperature that made everyone else uncomfortable, while she sat perfectly at ease in her throne of a wingback chair. Elena stood in the foyer, holding a store-bought pie, because Margaret had stopped trusting her homemade desserts after the incident 3 years ago when Elena's lemon bars were deemed too tart, which everyone knew was code for something else entirely. In Margaret's house, food criticism was spiritual warfare. "You're late," Margaret called from the living room, not looking up from her magazine. She was 63 and dressed like she was hosting a state dinner rather than a family. Sunday lunch pearls, cashmere sweater set, slacks with a crease sharp enough to slice bread. 5 minutes, Nathan said, his hand on Elena's lower back, a gesture that was either protective or performative. Elena could never quite tell. "Traffic from church." "Traffic," Margaret repeated, the word dripping with skepticism, as if traffic were a personal failing rather than a fact of suburban Sundays. They'd gone to early service, specifically to avoid Margaret's church, the massive congregation downtown, where she served on 3 committees and wielded her volunteering like a weapon. Elena's small church, New Covenant Fellowship, where Pastor Grace Emanuel preached about mercy more than judgment, was a point of contention. Margaret called it that little charismatic place, which was her way of saying it wasn't Presbyterian enough, wasn't traditional enough, wasn't interested enough in maintaining the social hierarchies Margaret held sacred. "James is already here," Margaret continued, finally looking up, her gaze traveling over Elena with the clinical assessment of someone shopping for furniture and finding everything slightly off. He and Sarah brought the twins. 3 months old and already sleeping through the night. Sarah says it's all about routine and discipline from day one. Elena felt Nathan's hand press harder into her back. Of course, James and Sarah were here with their perfect twins. Of course, the universe would arrange this particular cosmic joke. Elena leaving a fertility clinic on Thursday, facing twin babies on Sunday. God had a sense of humor, just not one that ever seemed to work in her favor. "We brought pie," Elena offered, holding up the store-bought evidence of her inadequacy. "How lovely," Margaret said, in a tone that meant the opposite. "Put it in the kitchen. Sarah made a chocolate torte from scratch this morning. Says she barely sleeps these days but wanted to contribute. Such a giver, that girl." Elena escaped to the kitchen before she said something that would confirm every suspicion Margaret had ever held about her. The kitchen was Margaret's domain: granite countertops, top-of-the-line appliances, a refrigerator that dispensed both ice and judgment. Sarah's chocolate torte sat prominently on the island, layered and perfect, garnished with raspberries arranged in a pattern that probably spelled out, "I'm better than you," in some secret baker's code. Elena shoved her store-bought pie onto a lower shelf of the refrigerator, where it could hide in shame with the other inadequate offerings. "Elena," Sarah's voice came from the dining room, bright and sharp as breaking glass. "Come meet the babies, they're awake." There were circles of hell Dante never imagined. This was one of them. Elena forced her smile into place and walked into the dining room, where Sarah sat in state, a twin on each side of her in matching bassinets that probably cost more than Elena's car. Sarah was 30, blonde, effortlessly thin despite having birthed 2 humans 3 months ago, and possessed the kind of confidence that came from never having failed at anything biological. "This is Mason and Madison," Sarah announced, gesturing to the twins like a game show host, revealing prizes. "Mason's on the left. He's 2 minutes older and very serious about it. Madison's more laid back. Aren't they perfect?" They were. Objectively, scientifically perfect, pink-cheeked, clear-eyed, small fists waving in that random way newborns have, as if they're conducting symphonies only they can hear. "Gorgeous," Elena managed, and it came out sounding almost genuine. "Years of practice." "Do you want to hold one?" Sarah offered, already standing, already lifting Madison, already forcing Elena into the one position she'd been trying to avoid. "I shouldn't, I'm getting over a cold," Elena lied, backing up slightly. "Oh, come on," Sarah pressed, and suddenly Madison was being transferred into Elena's arms, warm and impossibly light, smelling of baby lotion and powder, and every prayer Elena had ever prayed. The room went quiet. Not literally. James was still talking to Nathan about the new house they were building. Margaret was clattering dishes in the kitchen, but around Elena, everything stopped. Time suspended. The universe held its breath. Madison squirmed, made a small cooing sound, and Elena looked down at her at the perfect bow of her mouth, the dark eyes blinking up with newborn seriousness. The tiny hand that reached out and grasped Elena's finger with surprising strength. Something inside Elena cracked. Not broke, not yet, but developed the kind of fracture that would spread slowly, silently, until the whole structure collapsed. "She likes you," Sarah said, and there was something in her voice. Was it kindness, pity, triumph? That Elena couldn't decode. Mason's more of a daddy's boy, but Madison loves everyone. Elena wanted to hand the baby back, wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to ask why God would create this particular torture, putting a 3-month-old miracle into the arms of a woman who'd just been told her eggs were dying, her chances were 5%. Her body was a biological dead end. Instead, she swayed slightly, an automatic rocking motion she hadn't known she knew, and Madison settled against her chest, content, trusting, completely unaware that she was simultaneously the most beautiful and most painful thing Elena had held in 7 years. "Lunch is ready," Margaret announced, her voice carrying from the kitchen with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Sarah lifted Madison from Elena's arms, a relief and a devastation, and placed both twins back in their bassinets. "They'll sleep through lunch," she said confidently. "Like I told Margaret, it's all about routine." They gathered around Margaret's dining room table, which was set with china that had been in the Brooks family for 3 generations and would presumably pass to James and Sarah's children, since Elena's phantom offspring couldn't inherit what would never exist. Nathan pulled out Elena's chair, a gesture that would have been chivalrous if it didn't feel like an apology for his mother. Margaret served pot roast with the precision of a surgeon, making sure everyone's plate was exactly right before sitting at the head of the table. James said grace, a long, elaborate prayer that thanked God for family, for blessings, for the precious gifts of grandchildren that bring such joy to this home. Elena kept her eyes closed longer than necessary, letting the amen fade before opening them. The conversation started safely enough, James's architecture firm landing a major contract, Sarah's plans to go back to work part-time once the twins were 6 months old, Nathan's community center project breaking ground next month. Margaret held court, offering opinions on everything from childcare philosophy to the proper way to fold napkins. Elena ate mechanically, tasting nothing, contributing nothing, becoming increasingly aware that she was the only person at this table who didn't fit the pattern. Everyone else was a parent or a grandparent, or actively contributing to the Brooks family legacy in some measurable way. "So," Margaret said suddenly, her fork pausing mid-air, her eyes locking on Elena with predatory precision, "how did your doctor's appointment go? Thursday, wasn't it?" The table went silent. Elena felt Nathan stiffen beside her. "Mother," Nathan said, warning in his voice, "that's private." "Private?" Margaret's eyebrows arched. "We're family. Family doesn't keep secrets, especially about something as important as this." She turned to James and Sarah. "They saw a fertility specialist. Finally. After 7 years, they're finally getting real help." Sarah's expression flickered surprise, then sympathy, then something that might have been relief that her own fertility wasn't in question. "Margaret," Elena said quietly, using her mother-in-law's first name like a boundary, "I'd rather not discuss it at lunch. And I'd rather have grandchildren from both my sons," Margaret shot back, her smile sharp. "But we don't always get what we want, do we?" The words landed like a slap. James cleared his throat. "Mom, come on." "Come on what?" Margaret set down her fork with deliberate care. "I'm not allowed to express disappointment that after 7 years there's still no progress? That every Christmas card we send is James's family of 4, while Nathan's is just a couple? That Sarah and I are the only ones contributing to the next generation, while Elena—" "Margaret," Nathan's voice cut across the table, steel beneath the surface. "That's enough." "Is it?" Margaret leaned forward, and Elena recognized the posture of someone who'd been waiting for this moment, who'd been sharpening knives in private, and was now ready to use them in public. "Because I've been patient, I've been understanding. I've watched you waste the best years of your life waiting for something that clearly isn't meant to be. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to consider that God is trying to tell you something." "What is he trying to tell me, Margaret?" Elena heard herself ask, her voice steady despite everything inside her shaking. "Please, enlighten me. What message is God sending through my defective ovaries?" Sarah gasped. James stared at his plate. Nathan reached for Elena's hand under the table, but she pulled away. Margaret's eyes glittered with something that might have been satisfaction. "I think God makes some women mothers and some women something else. And there's no shame in accepting what he's made you for. But there is shame in forcing it, in dragging my son through endless disappointment, in making him choose between you and the family he deserves." "He's not choosing," Elena interrupted, standing up, her napkin falling to the floor. "There's no choice to make. I'm his wife." "And a wife is supposed to give her husband children," Margaret said, also standing now, their family dinner dissolving into confrontation with Sarah and James as horrified witnesses. "It's biblical, Elena. It's natural. It's the foundation of marriage. And if you can't do that, if your body won't cooperate, If God himself is saying no, then maybe the kindest thing would be to release Nathan from a promise that was made under false pretenses. The room tilted. Elena stared at Margaret, at this woman who'd never liked her, who'd opposed their marriage from the beginning, who'd spent 7 years waiting for exactly this moment to suggest what she'd been thinking all along, that Elena should divorce Nathan so he could find a woman whose eggs weren't dying, whose body wasn't broken, whose biology could deliver the grandchildren Margaret felt entitled to. "You want me to divorce him?" Elena said flatly. "Not a question, a statement." "I want you to consider what's best for Nathan," Margaret corrected. "What's best for this family, and if that means—" "Mum, stop." Nathan was standing now too, his face pale. "Just stop talking, right now." But Margaret couldn't stop. 7 years of restraint, of pointed comments and passive aggression were flooding out like a dam break. "She's barren, Nathan. The Bible has words for this. God has closed her womb. And I know that sounds harsh, but sometimes truth is harsh. Sometimes we have to face facts. You could have children with someone else. You deserve children. And if she really loved you, get out." The words came from Nathan, low and dangerous, and everyone turned to stare at him. "What?" Margaret blinked, genuinely surprised. "Get out of my mother's house?" Nathan's laugh was bitter. "No, Elena and I are leaving, right now." He turned to James and Sarah. "I'm sorry you had to witness this. Congratulations on the twins. They're beautiful." Then he took Elena's hand, and this time she let him and pulled her toward the foyer. Behind them, Margaret's voice rose. "Nathan, don't you dare walk out on me. Nathan, I'm trying to help you. Someone has to say what everyone's thinking." But they were already out the door, into the cold November afternoon, into Nathan's car. He started the engine with shaking hands, pulled out of his mother's driveway too fast, and drove in silence for 3 blocks before pulling over on a random street and gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I should have stopped her sooner. I should have God. Elena, I'm sorry." Elena stared out the windshield at a neighborhood that wasn't theirs, at houses full of families that weren't theirs, at a future that looked less possible with every passing day. "She's right, though," Elena heard herself say. "About all of it. I am barren. My eggs are dying. I can't give you children. And you could with someone else. You could have everything," she said. "Elena? It's true." She turned to look at him, this man she'd loved for 8 years, this man whose mother had just suggested he trade her in for a newer model. "Doctor Reed said you're top percentile, you're perfect. The problem is entirely me. And your mother is right. Why should you waste your best years on a woman whose body doesn't work?" "Stop," Nathan's voice was fierce. "Don't let her poison you with that. Don't you dare internalize her cruelty. It's not cruelty if it's true. It's cruelty regardless." Nathan reached for her face, made her look at him. "I married you. Not your ovaries, not your eggs. You. And yes, I want children. Yes, this is hard. Yes, I'm disappointed and frustrated and scared about what comes next. But divorcing you, trading you in, Elena, that's not even on the table. That's not even a consideration." Elena wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly. But Margaret's words had landed in soil prepared by 7 years of failure, and they were already taking root. "What if the IVF doesn't work?" she whispered. "What if we spend $60,000 and it still doesn't work? What if we try everything and I still can't? Then we try something else. Adoption, foster care. We build a different family. But not your family, not your DNA, not your—" "Elena." Nathan's hands were on her shoulders now, his face close to hers. "I need you to hear me, really hear me. I don't want children with someone else. I want a life with you. However that looks, whatever that means, we'll figure it out together." She searched his face, looking for the lie, the doubt, the secret resentment. But all she saw was the man who'd sketched their future on coffee shop napkins, who'd promised her surprises and chaos and beautiful disruption. "Okay," she whispered, because she didn't know what else to say. "Okay." Nathan echoed, and pulled her into his arms in the front seat of the car on a random street in suburban Connecticut, holding her while she finally let herself break. While the grief she'd been holding through the doctor's appointment and the diagnosis and Margaret's execution finally spilled over. She cried for the children she didn't have, for the 7 years of waiting, for the marriage that was supposed to be joyful and had become a medical emergency, for the mother-in-law who would never accept her, for the body that had betrayed her, for the God who seemed silent when she needed him to speak. Nathan held her through all of it, not saying anything, not offering solutions, just being present in the wreckage. When Elena's tears finally slowed, Nathan started the car again and drove them home. Neither of them spoke. There was too much to say, and no words adequate for saying it. At home, Elena went straight to the bedroom, changed into sweatpants, and climbed under the covers even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. Nathan brought her tea. She didn't drink, sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her back through the blankets, eventually lay down beside her and held her as the light faded from the windows. "I won't see her again," Nathan said quietly into the dimness. "My mother, not until she apologizes. A real apology." Elena knew what that meant. Margaret didn't apologize. Margaret doubled down. This could mean months, maybe years, of estrangement. And part of Elena, the part that still hoped for normal, for family, for acceptance, mourned that. But another part of her felt something else. Relief, gratitude, the fierce joy of being chosen, even if the choosing came at a cost. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For picking me, for walking out, for not leaving me there." Nathan's arms tightened around her. "Always," he said, "I'll always pick you, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." They lay in the darkness, 2 people trying to figure out how to be married in the aftermath of disaster, how to rebuild when the foundation kept shifting. Elena's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She ignored it, buzzed again, and again. Finally, Nathan reached over and checked it. "It's Pastor Grace," he said. "She's asking if you're okay. Says she felt led to pray for you this afternoon." Elena took the phone, stared at the message. Pastor Grace Emmanuel, the gentle Jamaican woman who'd become Elena's spiritual anchor over the past 3 years, who never asked about babies, who never treated Elena's childlessness as a spiritual deficiency, who preached about the God who saw Hagar in the wilderness, who remembered Hannah in her barrenness, who made Sarah laugh at 90. Elena texted back, "Can I call you tomorrow? Today was hard." The response came immediately, "Anytime, beloved. I'm praying. He sees you. He hasn't forgotten." Elena set the phone down and closed her eyes. He sees you. He hasn't forgotten. She wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe that somewhere beyond Margaret's judgment and Dr. Reed's statistics and her own dying eggs, there was a God who saw her pain and was doing something about it. But belief was getting harder, hope was getting heavier, and the distance between prayer and answer felt like an ocean she was drowning in. Outside, the November wind picked up, rattling the windows, shaking the trees. Somewhere in the neighborhood, children played their voices, carrying on the wind, high and bright, and completely unconscious of their own miracle. Elena pressed her face into Nathan's chest and tried to pray. But the only words that came were the ones that had been coming for 7 years. "Please, God, please, I'm begging you, please." It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't theological, it was barely coherent, but it was honest. And maybe, Elena thought, in the economy of heaven, honest counted for something. Even if right now, in the economy of earth, she had nothing to show for 7 years of honesty except empty arms and a mother-in-law who thought she should disappear. The tree pendant lay on her dresser where she'd thrown it after getting home, roots and branches, hope and growth, all the things that seemed less like promise and more like mockery. Elena closed her eyes and let Nathan's heartbeat become a lullaby, a rhythm that said, "You're still here. You're still chosen. You're still worth fighting for." It would have to be enough. For now, it would have to be enough. The IVF hormones turned Elena into a stranger in her own body. She stood in the bathroom at 5:47 a.m., syringe in hand, staring at her reflection. 3 weeks into the protocol, and her face was puffy, her breasts tender, her moods cycling so rapidly she couldn't track them. Yesterday, she'd cried at a dog food commercial. This morning, she'd thrown a coffee mug at the wall because Nathan had asked what she wanted for breakfast. The mug had shattered. Nathan had cleaned it up without comment. The look on his face, resignation mixed with exhaustion, told her everything about where they'd landed. Elena lifted her shirt, found a spot on her abdomen that wasn't already bruised from previous injections, and pushed the needle in. The burn was familiar now. She'd stopped flinching after the first week. Now it was just routine. Wake up, inject hormones, try not to murder anyone before noon. The medication was called Folistim, designed to hyper-stimulate her dying ovaries into producing multiple eggs. She was also on Menopur, Cetratide, and a baby aspirin. Her bathroom counter looked like a pharmacy exploded. The refrigerator had a whole shelf dedicated to temperature-sensitive medications. Her life had become a clinical protocol with no room for spontaneity, romance, or any of the things marriage was supposed to contain. Nathan appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work. "How are you feeling?" It was a loaded question. The real answer, like my body is betraying me, like I'm drowning, like I'm being tortured for the crime of wanting to be a mother, wasn't the kind of thing you said out loud. Not at 5:47 a.m. Not when your husband had already cleaned up one broken mug and probably couldn't handle more wreckage before his first cup of coffee. "Fine," Elena said, disposing of the syringe in the sharps container they now kept under the bathroom sink. "Just another day in paradise." Nathan didn't smile at the bitter joke. He'd stopped smiling at her humor around week 2, when it became clear that IVF was less journey to parenthood and more descent into medical hell with occasional ultrasounds. "I have the community center meeting at 9, Nathan said. "Should be done by 11. Your ultrasound is at 2, right?" Elena nodded. Another ultrasound. Another wand inserted, while a technician counted follicles and measured her ovaries and determined whether her body was cooperating with the chemical manipulation. They'd done 3 ultrasounds already, each one followed by a call from the clinic adjusting her medication, increasing doses, adding new prescriptions. Her ovaries, Dr. Reed had explained last week, were responding sluggishly. Even with maximum stimulation, she was producing fewer follicles than expected. They were hoping for 15 to 20. So far, she had 8. Maybe. "I'll meet you there," Elena said. "You want me to drive you?" "I'm fine." Another loaded exchange. Nathan hovering, Elena resisting. They'd developed new patterns over the past 3 weeks, him trying to help, her pushing back because accepting help meant accepting how not fine she was. Nathan lingered in the doorway another moment, clearly wanting to say something, then thought better of it and left. Elena finished getting ready concealer to hide the shadows under her eyes, loose clothes to hide the bloating, sunglasses to hide the fact that she'd been crying again for no reason except hormones and grief, and the growing suspicion that this wouldn't work. She arrived at the church office at 8:30. Her part-time job, answering phones and managing the bulletin, was supposed to be temporary, something to keep her busy while they started a family. 7 years later, she was still here, still part-time, still temporary. "Morning, Elena," Jennifer, the office manager, called from her desk. She was 50-something, cheerfully efficient, and blessed with 3 grown children whose pictures covered her bulletin board. "How's the treatment going?" Elena had made the mistake of telling Jennifer about the IVF. In retrospect, telling anyone was a mistake. Now it was a topic of conversation, prayer requests, well-meaning questions that scraped against her raw places. "It's going," Elena said neutrally, heading to her desk in the corner. "I'm praying for you," Jennifer added. "My cousin did IVF, and it worked on the 3rd try. You just have to keep believing." 3rd try, $60,000. 3 cycles of this hell. Elena smiled and nodded and turned on her computer. The morning crawled by in a haze of phone calls, emails, and bulletin formatting. Elena ate lunch at her desk, a salad she didn't taste, string cheese she didn't want. Her body was a battleground. The hormones were soldiers, invading, occupying, demanding surrender. At 1:30, she left for the clinic. Dr. Reed's office was 40 minutes away, in a medical complex that Elena could now navigate blindfolded. She'd been here 6 times in 3 weeks. She knew which parking spot was closest to the elevator, which bathroom was least depressing, which magazines in the waiting room were worth reading. None of them. Nathan was already there when she arrived, sitting in their usual corner, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, offered a tired smile. Traffic wasn't bad. They'd become experts at filling silence with logistics, traffic reports, weather observations, anything except the truth of what they were feeling. The ultrasound tech called them back. Elena knew the routine: now undress from the waist down, lie on the table, feet in stirrups, stare at the ceiling tiles, while a stranger inserted a wand and measured her failure. "Okay, Mrs. Brooks," the tech said, her voice professionally cheerful. "Let's see how those follicles are doing." Elena felt the familiar pressure, discomfort, and invasion. Nathan held her hand, his thumb rubbing small circles on her wrist. A gesture that was supposed to be comforting but mostly reminded her that they were both here, both trapped in this clinical hell, both pretending it wasn't destroying them. The tech clicked and measured, her eyes on the screen. "I'm seeing, let me count, looks like 9 follicles. Good size on most of them. A couple are smaller but might catch up. 9, down from 8 yesterday, so 1 more maybe. Still nowhere near the 15 to 20 they needed. Dr. Reed will review the images," the tech continued. "But it looks like we might be able to trigger in the next day or 2. Trigger, the final injection that would force Elena's body to release the eggs for retrieval, then the surgical procedure to extract them, then the nerve-wracking wait to see how many fertilized, then the transfer, then the 2-week wait for a pregnancy test. So many steps, so many opportunities for failure." Elena got dressed while Nathan waited outside. When she emerged, he was talking to Dr. Reed in the hallway, both of them with serious expressions that made Elena's stomach drop. "Mrs. Brooks," Dr. Reed ushered them into his office. "Let's talk about where we are." Where they were, apparently, was at a decision point. "You're responding to the medication," Dr. Reed explained, pulling up her ultrasound images on his computer, "but not as strongly as we'd hoped. 9 follicles is workable, but it's on the lower end. We can proceed with retrieval, or we can cancel this cycle, adjust the protocol, and try again next month with different medications. Cancel, start over, more hormones, more money, more time." "What would you recommend?" Nathan asked. Dr. Reed folded his hands, and Elena recognized the posture of a man trying to manage expectations. "Honestly, with 9 follicles, we might retrieve 6 or 7 eggs. Of those, maybe 4 or 5 will fertilize. Of those, maybe 2 or 3 will develop to day 5. We'd transfer 1, freeze the others if they're viable. Your odds of success this cycle are probably around 20 to 25%. 25%. 1 in 4. But if we cancel and try again," Elena asked, "we might get better results with a different protocol. Then again, we might not, and you'd lose another month of time." Time. The thing they were running out of. The thing her ovaries didn't have. Every month, Dr. Reed had explained, her reserve diminished. Waiting could mean fewer eggs next time. Elena looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at her. And in that moment, she saw it, the toll this was taking on him, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he'd aged in 3 weeks. The distance growing between them, despite his insistence that they were in this together. "We proceed," Elena decided. "We've come this far. Let's see it through." Dr. Reed nodded. "All right. I'll have the nurse call with your trigger shot timing, probably tomorrow night. Then retrieval on Wednesday morning." They scheduled the procedures, received more instructions, left with another bag full of medications. In the car, Nathan started the engine but didn't drive. "Are you sure about this? We can wait. We can try again next month." I'm sure, Elena lied. She wasn't sure of anything anymore, except that stopping felt like surrender, and she'd been surrendering to her broken body for 7 years. This time, she was going to fight, even if the fighting was killing her. They drove home in silence. Nathan ordered takeout because neither of them had the energy to cook. They ate in front of the TV, watching shows they weren't following, existing in the same space without really being together. Elena's phone rang at 8:47 p.m. The clinic, she answered. Mrs. Brooks, this is Nurse Cara from Dr. Reed's office. Your blood work came back and everything looks good. You're going to trigger tomorrow night at exactly 10 p.m. That means your retrieval will be Wednesday at 10 a.m. Remember, nothing to eat or drink after midnight Tuesday. Mr. Brooks will need to provide a sample Wednesday morning at the clinic. Do you have any questions? Elena had 1,000 questions. What if it doesn't work? What if we spend $20,000 on nothing? What if this destroys my marriage? What if I'm doing all of this for a 25% chance that will land in the 75% failure zone? No questions, Elena said. Thank you. She hung up, looked at Nathan. Trigger shot is tomorrow night at 10, retrieval Wednesday at 10 a.m. Nathan nodded. Okay, I'll take the day off. You don't have to. Elena, he turned off the TV, faced her fully. I'm taking the day off. I'm going to be there. We're doing this together, remember? Together. That word again, the word that was supposed to mean unity, but increasingly felt like a lie they were both complicit in. Okay, Elena whispered, together. The next day passed in surreal slow motion. Elena went to work, answered phones, formatted the bulletin, smiled when Jennifer asked if she was ready for the retrieval. She left early, went home, tried to nap, but couldn't sleep. Nathan came home at 7 with flowers, yellow roses, her favorite. A gesture that would have been romantic if it didn't feel like an apology for what they were about to endure. They ate dinner, watched the clock. At 9:45, Elena prepared the trigger shot, a different medication, a bigger needle, an intramuscular injection Nathan would have to give her because she couldn't reach the spot herself. At exactly 10 p.m., she stood in the bathroom, her pajama pants lowered, while Nathan administered the injection. His hands were shaking, the needle went in, the medication burned. Elena gripped the counter and breathed through it. Done, Nathan said quietly, disposing of the syringe. Done, Elena echoed. They went to bed early. Elena lay awake, feeling the medication work through her system, feeling her ovaries swell, feeling her body being coerced into cooperation. She thought about the eggs ripening inside her, the ones the doctors would extract in 12 hours. 9 follicles, maybe 9 eggs, maybe less, possibly her last chance to have biological children. Please, God, she prayed into the darkness. Please let this work. Please don't let this have been for nothing. Nathan's breathing evened out beside her. He'd fallen asleep, or was pretending to, giving them both permission to be alone with their private fears. Elena touched her abdomen, swollen and tender from the hormones. Somewhere in there, eggs were preparing to be harvested. Somewhere in there, hope was still alive, barely, hanging on by threads thin as spider silk. The tree pendant lay on her nightstand. She'd taken to wearing it every day, a talisman, a reminder of Nathan's promise that they had roots and branches, that growth was still possible. But tonight, the pendant just looked like what it was, silver and cold and inanimate. A symbol that couldn't guarantee anything, a hope that might shatter by this time tomorrow. Elena closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. And in the darkness, she felt the first whisper of a question that would haunt her through everything that followed. What if God doesn't answer? What if 7 years of prayers have been falling into void? What if I'm waiting for a miracle that will never come? The questions circled like vultures, and Elena lay awake beneath them, counting down the hours until Wednesday morning, when they would finally know if her body could produce even this one small thing, eggs. Just eggs, the basic building blocks of the family she'd been praying for since she was a child herself. The night stretched on, dark and silent. And Elena waited, as she'd been waiting for 7 years, for morning to come and deliver its verdict. That night, sleep refused to come. The questions circled her like vultures. But beneath all the fear, a small voice whispered, "Hold on." Because sometimes, before the miracle is born, God allows the storm to test your faith, not to break you, but to prepare you for the moment He will prove every whisper wrong. As the clock ticked toward dawn, Elena didn't know that heaven had already written a different result, one that would change not just her story, but generations after her. And to everyone listening tonight, maybe your own story feels like hers. Unanswered, unseen, unfair. I pray that your waiting will not end in shame, but in testimony. May every silent tear become the seed of your greatest miracle. Type where you are watching from and declare, "My miracle is coming," in the comments if you believe. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone whose faith needs strengthening. Because this is just the beginning. Stay tuned for part 2. The doctor's verdict on the woman who was shamed for being barren, but God delivered the unexpected miracle.